Coming up on this Thursday edition of Newsline at Noon, Parliament begins reviewing a reform plan by the National Intelligence Service after months of bickering over the spy agency's alleged meddling in last year's presidential election. The Korean government has stepped in to pressure public organisations to bring their ballooning debts under control, warning that organisation heads will be fired if they fail to make drastic reforms. Plus, pilot error and automated control systems are the key issues in the US National Transport Safety Board's hearing on the Asiana Airlines plane crash in July that killed 3 and left scores injured. These stories and more on Newsline at Noon.
Where's the best place for bibimbap?
Les Jeux Olympiques d'hiver se dérouleront-ils à Pyeongchang?
هل أنتم حقاً سابع أكبر مصدر في العالم؟
この歌手は誰ですか？你好，最近哪部电视剧的人气最旺？
Korea is attracting interest from around the world. The more you know, the more you want to know. Dynamic Korea.
Thanks for joining us. You're watching Newsline at Noon. I'm Chae Yusan in Seoul.
Very good to have you with us. I'm Mark Broom. The Special Parliamentary Committee to reform the State Spy Agency resumed its work on this Thursday and is currently meeting to discuss a reform plan drafted by the spy agency itself.
And for more on the meeting today and what's next for the committee, let's now go over to our political correspondent Kim Hyun-ji at the National Assembly. Hi, Hyun-ji. Fill us in on the latest.
Hi, Yusan and Mark. The Special Parliamentary Committee on Reforming the National Intelligence Service convened a closed-door meeting this morning. National Intelligence Service Chief Nam Jae-jun is at the meeting and is believed to have presented a reform plan that his agency put together. It is the first time lawmakers are hearing the plan, which will bar NIS agents from entering the National Assembly, political parties, and media outlets, which is common practice now. The committee's assistant managers gave out their first briefing less than 5 minutes ago, and according to this briefing, the spy agency's reform plan includes making it mandatory for all NIS agents and new recruits to swear not to intervene in politics. And the plan also includes barring retired NIS agents from entering politics for the first 3 years since retirement. The spy agency has been at the center of a national controversy all year long. It is suspected of launching an extensive online smear campaign targeting the opposition candidates in the run-up to last year's presidential election. The prosecution has revised its indictment against the NIS 2 times so far. The first time was at the end of October when prosecutors found politically slanted messages allegedly posted by NIS agents on Twitter. Prior to that, the spy agency was believed to have posted political comments only on web portals. The prosecution revised the indictment again last month, saying that it had discovered some 1.2 million additional messages on Twitter, which were believed to have been retweeted extensively using a computer program called Twitter Bot. Then just last week, a Korean daily reported that the number of politically slanted messages posted by NIS agents on Twitter was around 22 million, 18 times the number listed on the revised indictment against the agency. And with the allegations against the spy agency growing in size and scope, the agency has faced increasing pressure to reform. And so today's meeting gives lawmakers an opportunity to listen to the spy agency's reform proposal and decide how to move on from there.
So, Hyun-ji, this meeting was supposed to have been held earlier this week. What caused the delay and what's next?
Yes, Yusun. This session was scheduled for Tuesday, but ruling party lawmakers called it off that day in protest against some controversial remarks made by 2 opposition lawmakers the day before and on Sunday. On Sunday, Democratic Party lawmaker Chang Ha-na, referring to the spy agency meddling scandal, called last year's presidential election a fraud and demanded a nude presidential election be held next June. Then another DP lawmaker Yang Seung-jo said on Monday that President Park could follow the fate of her father, the late President Park Chung-hee, who was assassinated after exercising dictatorial power over Korea for nearly 18 years, if she refuses to listen to the people. Now that the special committee has resumed work, it will have a lot to do in the coming weeks. Next week, the committee will hold public hearings to gather experts' views on how to reform the spy agency, and then it will start deliberations on how the NIS law and the law on public officials should be revised in order to carry out the necessary reforms. The special committee has about 3 weeks to complete all of the legislative work necessary to reform the spy agency in the way that it sees fit. Back to you, Mark and Yusun.
OK, thank you very much, Yeonji, for your report. Sounds like they're going to have a lot of work over the next 3 weeks, but do keep us updated throughout the day. Now, the government has rolled out comprehensive measures aimed at ensuring financial responsibility and fixing the sloppy management practices that have seen state agencies run up some really rather huge debts.
Our Hwang Jie has more on the reality check for the nation's public sector.
The Korean government is geared up to fight the mounting debt that public organizations face. Unveiling a set of measures on Wednesday designed to bring the debt under control, it said 41 heavily indebted public organizations will have to reduce their debt levels to 200% of their equity by 2017 from the current average of 220%. The government will initially focus on 12 state agencies, including the Korea Electric Power Corporation, the Korea Land and Housing Corporation, and a public foundation that doles out scholarships and tuition-linked loans.
Those under intensive monitoring will have to release their debt-related information by the third quarter of next year, and the heads will face punitive measures if they fail to improve their debt-equity ratio.
The 12 state agencies saw their combined debt expand by more than 220 trillion won, or roughly $210 billion over the previous 5 years to more than $390 billion last year, making up over 80% of the debt owed by all public organizations in the nation. The debt owed by the nation's 295 public organizations stood at around $470 billion at the end of last year, nearly double from 2007 and almost $45 billion more than the government debt. The public organizations have been under fierce criticism for offering high salaries and other benefits to their employees despite their poor finances. Underscoring the government's determination to improve finances of state-run agencies, it also decided to release a detailed report on their financial health in October every year. Hwang Jie, Arirang News.
Korea Central Bank has left its key interest rate unchanged at 2.5% for the 7th straight month in December. The Bank of Korea's decision, which was widely expected, was made at its monthly monetary policy meeting on Thursday. The central bank expects the economy at home and abroad to stay on a path of moderate recovery, but cited the U.S. Federal Reserve's planned tapering of its bond-buying stimulus program as a lingering uncertainty for the global economy. The Korean economy grew 1.1% in the third quarter of this year from the previous quarter when it gained at the same pace. The economy's quarter-on-quarter growth remained below 1% for more than 2 years until early this year. Korea's oil products have been selling well overseas this year. Oil refining industries and the Korea Petroleum Association say the nation's oil product exports are expected to exceed $50 billion this year for the second consecutive year. Korea exported $49.2 billion worth of petroleum products from January to November, accounting for 9.6% of the country's export total. But that is lower than the more than 10% recorded during the same period last year. Last year, oil products were the country's top export item, while this year, semiconductors sold better, pushing oil products into second place.
President Park has pledged to create a business environment in which creativity, innovation and new ideas can lead to economic revitalization. Speaking at a fair on the creative economy on Thursday, President Park stressed that in order to break away from low growth and high unemployment, the country should shift its economic paradigm to a more creative and innovative one. In an effort to work towards a creative economy, she vowed to create a so-called offline creative economy town that would contain the different resources and strategies of each region and provide local residents with tailored government support. The president also put an emphasis on finance as the key to connect such efforts into real business and promised to increase support to create a massive amount of seed money for the creative economy. The nation's rail services are again feeling the strain on this fourth day of a walkout by members of the Railway Workers Union. More than 1/3 of unionised rail workers are now taking part, and the number is growing by the day. Kim Hyun-bin reports.
Freight train services are the worst affected by this week's industrial action, running at just 37% of normal levels. Express train services have also been hit. But the nation's high-speed KTX bullet trains continue to operate as normal. The government is urging the thousands of rail workers who have downed tools to return to work as soon as possible.
This strike goes against government policy. It's not justified and doesn't have a practical interest. People need to get back to work before it's too late.
Around 1/3 of Korail's workers remain on strike, but little over 600 have returned to their roles since the strike started Monday. Nearly 8,000 workers have gone on strike, and the vast majority, over 6,700, have been removed from their posts, and around 90 have been shown the door permanently. The union launched the strike on Monday in protest of Korail's plan to establish an affiliate for a new bullet train line. It thinks the plan would eventually lead to the privatization of Korail, mass job losses, and fare hikes. In a separate incident, a freight train partially derailed in the southeast of the country early Thursday morning. No one was hurt, and the Transport Ministry has concluded the incident was caused by damage to a wheel. Kim Hyun-bin, Arirang News.
For your fill of Korean and international news. Join Chae Yu-sun and Mark Broom every weekday at lunchtime. Newsline at Noon.
Plenary session this Wednesday and vote on the government restructuring bills. At a hearing on the deadly crash of an Asiana Airlines passenger jet at San Francisco International Airport in July, U.S. investigators said the pilot was worried about his ability to land. They also said the plane was coming in too slow and too low as it made its final approach. 3 people were killed and more than 180 injured in the crash. Our Kim Young-gil has the details.
The trainee pilot of the Asiana Airlines Boeing 777 that crashed in San Francisco told investigators that he was very concerned about landing without assistance from the runway's navigation aid system. According to information released by the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, the pilot said he was stressed about the approach and thought the autothrottle was working when the plane was flying too slow and too low.
About 11 seconds prior to impact, an audible alert consistent with the low airspeed caution was recorded. But the action was too late, and the main gear and underside of the aft fuselage struck the seawall.
The airport's navigation aid was out of service due to construction, although a visual lighting system was operational at the time of the crash. Captain Lee Gang-guk, who had a lot of experience in Boeing 747s but was transitioning to a Boeing 777, might have inadvertently disabled a speed control system, according to NTSB documents. The hearing focused on whether the pilot's over-reliance on the autopilot system had degraded his human flying skills and increased the risk of accidents. The automated cockpit system is also seen as key to the probe. Some crew members told investigators the autothrust that controls the aircraft power was always engaged, but the safety board said it was not engaged when it approached the runway. Kim Hyun-gil, Arirang News.
Samsung was the loser in its global patent war with Apple on Thursday after a Seoul court said that some iPhone and iPad features do not infringe on the Korean tech giant's patents. The Seoul Central District Court ruled that Apple did not infringe on 3 Samsung patents related to text messaging. The court added that 2 of Samsung's patents lacked originality and 1 was not used in the iPad model in question.
The Korean tech giant sued Apple in March of 2012 for using 3 of its technologies and requested a ban on sales of 6 iPhone and iPad models. Last year, the same court sided with Samsung, saying Apple had infringed on the Korean firm's 3G technology-related patents. The U.S. says it is considering all options, including sanctions for Ukraine, for again using force on demonstrators in a crackdown on Wednesday. The protesters, who continue to fill the capital city's Independence Square to demand the president's resignation, have turned down his request for talks to defuse the crisis. Kim Min-ji has more.
The United States is evaluating all its options, including sanctions against Ukraine, where anti-government protests continue to cripple the nation.
All policy options, including sanctions, are on the table in our view, but obviously that still is being evaluated.
The response follows a violent overnight crackdown in which riot police tried to clear protesters off the streets of Kiev. Police moved in on the main protest camp in the city's Independence Square, removing barricades and tents. Scuffles and clashes were reported as demonstrators formed human walls to resist the push. The police pulled away hours later and protesters rebuilt barricades and set up new tents. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry condemned the crackdown and expressed his disgust at the authorities' decision to, quote, meet the peaceful protests with riot police, bulldozers and batons, rather than with respect for democratic rights and human dignity. On the same day, Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych invited representatives of all political forces, priests and public figures to hold talks on resolving the national crisis. Yanukovych called on the opposition not to follow the path of confrontation and ultimatums in a statement published on the presidential website. But opposition leaders rejected the offer, saying they will not sit down for talks until the president accepts their demands that he and the government resign and that he release those that were arrested during the protests. The protests were sparked by the government's last-minute decision last month to suspend plans to sign an integration pact with the European Union and instead forge closer ties with Russia. In a related development, a delegation of Ukrainian officials will hold talks in Brussels Thursday on implementing a trade deal with the EU. Kim Min-ji, Arirang News.
The U.S. and Britain have suspended all non-lethal assistance into northern Syria, but will continue supplying humanitarian aid. White House spokesperson Josh Earnest says the decision was made after Islamist rebels seized critical infrastructure belonging to the opposition's Supreme Military Council. Fighters from the Islamic Front, a union of 6 major rebel groups, took control of the Free Syrian Army bases at the Bab al-Hawa crossing on Syria's northwestern border with Turkey last Friday. The non-lethal aid includes medical supplies, communication equipment, and vehicles. U.S. and European countries have been reluctant to provide weapons and ammunition to rebel groups in Syria, as they might end up in the hands of jihadists affiliated to al-Qaeda.
Japan will set up a new amphibious military unit and deploy unarmed surveillance drones in its southwest to respond to China's growing military power. This, according to drafts of the country's latest security strategy and defense plans that were released on Wednesday. The new strategy calls for Japan to respond calmly and resolutely to the rapid expansion and setup of China's maritime and air activities, which it says are attempting to change the regional status quo by force. The plans say amphibious forces, along with drones and early warning aircraft, will be set up on the southern island of Okinawa. Responding to the plans, China's foreign ministry said Japan was directing unreasonable criticism at its normal maritime and air activities and hyping up the situation for its own political motives. Pope Francis has been named Time magazine's Person of the Year. The magazine said the Pope had pulled the papacy out of the palace and into the streets during his 9 months in office. The win is not that big of a surprise when you consider Pope Francis was also the most talked about name on Facebook, the most powerful person on Twitter, and the most talked about name on the entire internet. Francis became pontiff in March this year following the resignation of Pope Benedict XVI in February. NSA whistleblower Edward Snowden was runner-up. Also in the top 10 list were gay rights activist Edith Windsor, Syrian President Bashar al-Assad and singer Miley Cyrus. Now, it's that time of year here in Korea where parents are scrambling to register their kids at local public kindergartens for the next school year. You might expect it to be a relatively hassle-free process, but think again, as the severe lack of spaces makes it a very stressful time for parents. Connie Lee explains.
It's one crowded room. Breaths are being held, hands are clasped, and some prayers are being said. These are moms, dads, grandparents, and neighbors who are hoping their numbers get called out. It's a random lucky drawing of 50 spots for this one public kindergarten in Seoul. But the number of people vying for them, nearly 600. There's cheering and clapping for the lucky ones. And also tears. Tears of joy.
Feels like a dream. I didn't expect it, but they said my number, 83. I just couldn't believe it. I screamed.
This feels better than when my daughter got into college. But I do feel bad for those parents who didn't get their numbers called. I see how stressed they are.
Stressed and disappointed for those parents going home empty-handed from this drawing.
I didn't get it last year, and it happened again this year. I didn't even get selected to be on the waiting list. I'm very upset.
With a shortage of kindergartens in the nation, especially in Seoul, it's a battle for parents just to get their child into one. In the capital city, there were more than 244,000 children who were eligible to enroll, but the spaces available, less than 10,000. In Korea, children ages 3 to 5 can enroll in private or public kindergartens, or those funded by local or state governments. And public kindergartens, because of their little to no tuition costs, are a favorite choice among parents.
Public kindergartens like ours are in high demand. But because a lot of kids do get cut, there is uproar from parents who say that more public kindergartens are needed.
But from the government's point of view, getting a child into a kindergarten really shouldn't be that competitive.
The government has stepped up efforts to standardize the education system at public childcare facilities with those of kindergartens. So parents shouldn't just depend on kindergartens, but also look into other childcare facilities for their kids' education.
Connie Lee, Arirang News.
A new report by the OECD has ranked Korea among the top 4 countries in the world in the areas of math, reading and science. The comprehensive education survey conducted shows an upward trend for Korean students over the last 3 years. Our Paul Lee reports.
The Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development announced the results of its global academic survey this past week. The Program for International Student Assessment, or PISA, surveyed more than 500,000 15-year-old students from 65 different countries in 2012. Korea's performance among the 34 member states of the OECD placed it at the top of the list. In the subject area of mathematics, Korea ranked first and also ranked a first second in reading. It's the 3rd consecutive time that Korea has earned top marks in math and reading in the education survey that takes place every 3 years. The rankings are based on a 2-hour exam, which was administered to 5,200 Korean students in 150 schools nationwide. Average scores in math increased by 8 points from 2009, representing the highest result among OECD members, with Japan scoring 536 and the United States 481. When comparing student performance across all surveyed countries, Korea was still able to break into the top 5. Meanwhile, students in China, Singapore, and Hong Kong posted the highest overall scores in math, reading, and science. The OECD assessment also saw that boys outperformed their female counterparts in mathematics, while girls beat out boys in reading skills. However, this gender gap in Korean classrooms has been steadily shrinking over the last 10 years. Other trends that were highlighted for Korea include a growing percentage of students who overcome social disadvantages to perform well in math. and a more balanced performance of students across different socioeconomic backgrounds. Paul Yi, Arirang News.
And that's it for this Thursday edition of Newsline at Noon. Join us again tomorrow for headlines making news here in Korea and around the world.
And stay with us. We'll have more news coming your way in the afternoon.